In today's video, we have the latest NHL trade talk, including Detroit and Philip Zadina, who apparently requested a trade. The Leafs are way over the cap and need to move Matt Murray. According to Frank Silverberg, John Gibson is done with the Ducks and wants to be moved. We also have the latest on Alex Debrincat and William Nylander. Plus, we have a few signings, including the Habs signing RHP Pinard. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today, including a couple of more signings. The Montreal Canadiens have announced that they've come to terms with Raphael RHP Pinard, who had a real phenomenal, solid run to the end of the 22-23 regular season. After his call-up, he really was on fire there for quite some time. He gets a 2-year deal at $1.1 million. To me, that's a really good bargain contract for the Canadian team as a team. I thought he might be able to command a little bit more money than that. Obviously, as much as he had a really solid season, I guess it was in retrospect, a small sample size, but he looks like he could become, a sneaky good player for them who could play in their middle six and, be a good contributor. Maybe we'll see him hit 20 goals or more again this year. Hard to say what he's going to put up, but I suspect he'll continue to build off of last year's results and see if he can't establish himself even further. His next contract could be a little bit more lucrative. We'll see, but he was certainly a bright spot for the Canadiens last season. And the Jets also announced today that they've signed Axel Jonsson-Falaby. He gets a 2-year, two-way contract, $775,000. As we reported earlier, Detroit Red Wings forward Philip Zadina is on waivers. Of course, then he was a high draft pick in the 2018 draft class by the Red Wings and has not really found a consistent spot in their lineup, has had inconsistent results, and at this point has requested a trade from the team. Like I mentioned earlier, I think to some degree, the contract that he holds might be problematic for him to be picked up on waivers, even though he can be picked up for free. He's scheduled to hit $1.8 million this year and next, and I wonder if that might be problematic for some teams. I wouldn't be surprised if he does clear waivers and ends up being traded afterwards. A couple of reasons. Once he's cleared waivers, obviously it's a little easier to put the player in the minors, and secondly, maybe Detroit has to hold back some salary to make it work for some teams. I mean, obviously at this point, he only played 30 games last year, had 7 points. He had a career high, I think it was 27 points the year before that. He was most of his draft class is a lot more, at least the top players in the draft class, at least, are a lot more established and further along in their development in their careers with longer term deals now. And Zadina's still not a regular NHL player. So certainly things have not worked out, and of course now we understand why he's on waivers. Steve Yzerman is trying to help him find another opportunity. Yzerman made comments when asked about it today, saying that apparently they've had trade talks dating back to before the draft, or about a few weeks ago was when he and his agent had requested a trade, and nothing has materialized. I mean, he was mentioned when Detroit was more in the mix for Alex Debrincat. He was mentioned as a player who could be included going back. And obviously, I mean, I was a little skeptical that he'd be the centerpiece, but obviously I would hope not from Detroit from an Ottawa perspective, but at the same time, not surprised why he was being mentioned in trade talks since he wanted out. But we'll see if he gets picked up on waivers. If not, I'd expect a trade maybe with salary retained sometime shortly after. Speaking of a trade that needs to happen, the Toronto Maple Leafs need to do something. They don't have not a real tight timeline here, but with the recent signings of Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi, that put the Maple Leafs way over the cap. They're allowed to be 10% over during the offseason, so they're technically still compliant for right now. They do have the Jake Muzzin contract, who's going to be on LTIR all season. We already know that. He's already been confirmed to be done his playing days, so they have that at $5.6 million. So they do have to move the Matt Murray contract. That's all but sealed the fact that Murray's definitely not returning. I think the team probably already had their mind made up anyways that Murray wouldn't be in the mix next year. At this point, the main player they have to sign is Ilya Samsonov. They probably would like to still sign and have an extra couple of players on the roster just for some depth in the bottom six, or maybe an extra defenseman, just to kind of round out the roster so they have a little bit more flexibility in how many players they can carry. But obviously, the Murray contract would be the main one to get off the books right now. Obviously, if Samsonov ends up going to arbitration and they settle the contract through arbitration, then they will get a second buyout window, and they could consider buying him out, which obviously would save them pretty close to $4 million on their cap hit this year. Of course, they'd have an extra dead cap space the year after, but they'll probably not going to be too concerned about that right now. They're worried about the upcoming season only. And of course, if they end up going through the route of a trade, they're going to try to move the full cap and of course and be done with it, which I would suspect they're going to have to add an incentive. And I'm not really sure exactly which team would be a good team to send them to. Obviously, you've seen some players be moved around. Before, Chicago was a team who could take salary, but he's going to have to wonder where he could land. I mean, a buyout might be the more preferred method, but of course, at this point, we don't know 100% that Samsonov is going to be settled as a contract through arbitration, if they're even going to get that second window to even consider that. But it's fair to say that one way or another, Matt Murray will not be on the roster once he's moved out. Of course, that'll help them become cap compliant, but depending on the contract for Samsonov, it is possible that they may have to do an additional cost-cutting move as well. We'll just have to wait and see because we don't know what they're going to agree on for terms and money and if they want to add anything else on their roster here. So we'll see. But Murray's done in Toronto. That's definitely fair to say. Speaking of being done, Frank Saravalli has made comments on a recent podcast talking about John Gibson with the Anaheim Ducks. We already had heard word before. It was speculated that he had requested a trade. Now Frank is saying that not only has he requested a trade, that he's not going to be playing for them again. So, but the problem is, though, is he is under contract, and if he's not traded, I don't know what he plans to do, or if he plans on protesting, holding out. I don't know if we'll see anything like that. May not, but just Saravalli's words were that he will not play for them again. But if you look around the NHL, at this point, Gibson has not been traded, clearly. And the Ducks, I don't know that they have a ton of options when it comes to moving a goaltender. You look around the league, and a lot of teams have, there's still a few question marks, really, if you look around the league. But like there was a link to his hometown Penguins being an option. I'll do was to sign Tristan Jarry long-term, so that's not an option. Going into the offseason, everybody knew Ottawa was looking for a new goaltender to partner up with Anton Forsberg. Well, that's been filled with Jonas Korpisalo, so he's not going there. And you look around the league, like go through all the teams, there's not many that really jump out as a real goaltending need. And at the same time, if Gibson's playing with the Anaheim Ducks and he's frustrated and wants a better chance to win and all that, like you look at the teams that might need goaltending help, there's not really a lot there that, to me, that are ready to contend and win right now. Like you could say that maybe a team like Montreal has some question marks. I mean, they have Montembeault and Allen, both of which are not making a ton of money and they're not signed long-term or anything like that. So I could see them maybe deciding to bring in another goalie like a Gibson on a longer-term basis. They definitely don't seem like they have a ton of confidence in Keaton Primo. So maybe Montreal, but I'm not really sure it's the perfect match. Of course, the Habs would have to send a fair bit of Anaheim's way to make the money work because they're in a really bad cap situation themselves. A team like Detroit, maybe, they're in a situation where they could maybe swap and bring in a guy like Gibson, perhaps. But I mean, would they trade Ville Husso? I mean, I wouldn't think so. I mean, Husso seemed to be get the starting role last year. I don't know if that really makes the most sense either. And you look at around other teams that would have some question marks, and it's just like they're all like the teams that are near like the bottom of the standings. They're rebuilding teams. So I don't know if he's going to want to go from one rebuilding team to another. I just don't see a perfect logical fit right now where the Ducks could trade Gibson and I could look at it and be like, that just makes too much sense. They really should be talking about that and see if they can get it done. Because at this point, it's just nothing jumping out. Now, not to say that maybe a team might not emerge. Like one thing that does kind of make some sense to me is Winnipeg, because they don't know the long-term future of Connor Hellebuyck. They know he's not crazy about signing there, but again, is Gibson going to want to go to the Winnipeg Jets? That's another option. Like, does he even want to go to Canada? We don't even know. He's an American-born goalie, played his entire career in the States. He might be, showing some preference to remain south of the border. We don't know. But, I mean, Winnipeg could make some sense because he has term on his contract where Hellebuyck's in the final year. So maybe that's an option there. But, again, there's no real perfect match. So we'll see if Saravalli's words come true and where he ends up. Let me know where you think. Is there a perfect match that you see where John Gibson can be traded to that makes sense for both he and Anaheim Ducks to get a decent return as well? Now, of course, when it comes to Ottawa, let's look at the Debrincat situation. And it's starting to sound more and more like Vladimir Tarasenko might be waiting on the Senators. We heard it from Bruce Garriock and Darren Dreger, both from Bruce's latest column in the Ottawa Sun and Dreger's latest podcast with Ray Ferrero talking about the situation. And they acknowledge that Tarasenko doesn't have a ton of options and that Ottawa appears to have interest. But of course, they can't sign him or really do anything unless they were to move Debrincat, because we know at this point Debrincat does not want to sign long-term at Ottawa. So clearly they'd have to get that done to have the space to make that work. So maybe do they trade Debrincat for more future-based assets and go to free agency as a second-line scoring winger to replace him? That might make the most sense at this point. And it makes sense why Tarasenko hasn't signed as of yet, because he's clearly waiting on teams now. Andy Strickland of the St. Louis area, of course, he's a connected NHL reporter. Of course, where Tarasenko played in St. Louis a long time, he probably hears some stuff about Tarasenko. He said that he's mulling over multiple offers and not sure what he's doing yet. But according to Dreger and Garriock, they say that there's not, and actually Friedman mentioned this as well, that there's not many options on his offer table right now, and that Ottawa appears to be one of them, but it's contingent on them getting this other deal done. So we'll see if there is more to that. But when it comes to Debrincat, we learned a little bit more today about what he wants on the contract and what's holding things up. Looks like he's looking for basically the Timo Meier contract. He's looking for around $70 to $72 million over 8 years. So they give him an AAV rate around 8.7, 8.8 million per season. And at this point, teams just don't see him as being worth that much. His qualifying offer that was due was $9 million. And he's basically looking for that or very, very, very close to it. Obviously, I'm not sure what the Senators have offered him, but it doesn't really matter because I don't know that he's overly interested in staying. I just don't know that it was a good fit for him family-wise to play in Canada, where he's an American-born player. This seems like that is the consensus here. And really that's something that Ottawa probably should have done more homework on before acquiring him last year, because if he's not going to stay, it kind of defeats the whole purpose here. But the few teams that he gave to the Senators, like I said yesterday, a few of them were not even interested, and a few that were interested see him as being valued lower. I mean, they see him, instead of the Timo Meier contract, they see him being closer to the Jesper Bratt contract, so probably about 7.8. So that's about $1 million per season less than what he wants. So either he changes his mind and takes less money on an extension, which to me, I can't see him doing. At this point, he'd be better served to sign short-term and have another opportunity in free agency in the next year or two when the cap goes up. And if he can rebound and play stronger next year and have more goals, then he'll be able to get that money in the not-too-distant future. But at this rate, it seems like both the player side and the team side are both frustrated. They want to get this deal done. They'd like to accommodate him and move him along, but at the same time, teams just don't want to give him what he wants, so he's not going to agree to a sign and trade if it's not what he wants, and that's kind of hampering what Ottawa can bring back. Now, the one team that has been in the mix here recently is the Islanders. I've heard the Predators are in the mix too, and we're talking with the Ducks, and then they kind of seem to have faded out of the picture. But now, according to Elliot Friedman, the Ducks are back in the mix. They're still very much interested in his services, and apparently at first he wasn't, because that wasn't one of the teams that he gave to the Senators, so it wasn't like he wasn't like thrilled about going there in the beginning, but now apparently he's having second thoughts, looking at all the young talent they have, living in California, the lifestyle. It seems to be like not a sure thing that it's going to happen, but it seems like he's a lot more willing to consider it at this point. So they might be the team that comes through and gets it done. Either way, at least we know more about his contract and what's holding things up, and then it could be holding up another signing like a guy like Tarasenko, possibly replacing him in Ottawa. But Tarasenko's only going to wait so long too, so the longer this happens, the less likely he'll end up going to Ottawa. There was talk that he wasn't thrilled about playing in Canada. That's Tarasenko. But that he didn't have a ton of options, and Ottawa seemed to be willing to give him closer to what he wanted than some of the other teams. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. Hopefully for everybody's sake, it doesn't take too long so that everybody can kind of move on here. When it comes to William Nylander, big update today from Chris Johnson, of course, who's a well-connected NHL insider, especially when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. His comments today when asked about the William Nylander in the Toronto Maple Leaf contract negotiations on his pending extension, says that right now Nylander and the Leafs see the world completely differently. Right now is what he said. Nylander thinks he should be a $10 million plus player, and the Leafs don't see it that way. They see him as being somewhere in the eights, definitely below $9 million a season, probably in that 8.7, 8.8 range. Again, similar to the Timo Meier deal that he signed with the Devils. But again, William Nylander does not want to use any external contracts as comparables, and that's an issue. And as I've talked about here on the channel before, when it comes to Nylander or even the other Leaf lineman teammates here like Marner and Matthews, like their biggest concern, it seems like when they're getting their new contracts, is how they all compare to each other. And it's kind of crazy, in my opinion, how they don't really look around the league. They look at each other as comparables. Now, according to what they're saying about Nylander, and it's been discussed on multiple platforms here, CJ's not the only one to talk about it. Dreger's talked about it as well on his podcast too, and Friedman too. They all kind of have the same sort of thought process right now, that essentially Nylander's biggest concern right now is that he does not want to be paid too substantially less than Marner and Matthews. It's just that simple. He doesn't want to be the guy to go ahead and sign for market value and be a little bit more team friendly, and then have those guys not do it, and then he's going to have a big gap between what he's making and what they're making. Because it's well known Matthews' next extension, which is going to be due here short term anyways, just like Nylander, he's got 1 year left. Depending on the term that he signs, it's going to be anywhere. If he signs closer to the 3-year deal, which is rumored that he wants 3 to 5 years, that on 3 years is probably going to be closer to 13. If it gets up closer to 5 years, then it's going to inch up closer to 13.5 to 14. If Nylander signs at 8.8 or 8.9, that's a huge gap. And I don't know that he sees himself as being that much less than Matthews. And when it comes to Marner's obviously making over 10 now, but he's going to be looking for a raise on his next contract as well. Now, of course, he's another year away from having these same extension negotiations. But if Nylander signs long-term, let's say he signs a 6-7 year extension, and then Marner comes due, and then he blows him out and gets another big raise, because he'd already be under Marner now, and he knows Marner's going to get a raise on this next deal too. And then he'd end up being, possibly $3-4 million less than both of them, and that just doesn't sit well with him. So if he's going to insist on being a $10 million plus player, then they're going to have to pivot and look to be looking at a trade. Now, as I mentioned before, though, are there other teams around the NHL that would pay Nylander $10 million? I'm not completely sure that there is. If there is, I would say that it's probably only maybe a team like the Calgary Flames. I know they're a team that's in transition right now. I know there's been rumored interest to that team. He has connections to that city. I honestly do wonder about them. They have some players themselves that are in flux, and maybe they could have a swap there, like Elias Lindholm was being very reluctant to re-sign. I don't know if there's a fit there to make a trade, but at the same time, Carolina's been long rumored to have long interest in Nylander too. But again, I don't know that they would want to go $10 million. Carolina's known for being very, I don't want to say they're stingy, but they'll offer you what they think you're valued at based on the market, and they're not going any higher. If you don't want to take it, then they'll tell you to go to market and find it elsewhere. So I don't see him in his contract negotiation tactics working out with them as much as they like the player. So again, there's a fit there. There's a need. I don't know that there's going to be a deal. Calgary comes to mind, but not a lot of other teams. Really, if you think about it, they have a winger in Jonathan Huberdeau making that kind of money. And now, of course, he's also had a 100-point season. So, again, Nylander hasn't done that. He had a 40-goal season last year, but still, this is going to be very interesting. They're miles apart. Everybody's saying that negotiations are not well, and that there's such a strain in negotiations, according to Johnston, that, obviously that's not good. If it doesn't get settled here soon, you have to think they're going to start looking for a trade. They're going to get Matthews' contract sorted, and Matthews may not want to sort his contract without knowing what's going on with Nylander. Kind of have a connection between the two. They have a little bit of other moves around the roster to kind of get things closed out, to finish things up, and it's going to have a big impact. Now, thankfully, this contract that we're negotiating here is not going to be on the Leafs' books until next season, so it's not like it's going to have a huge impact right now, but they're not going to want them to walk for nothing, because that's the other option. Do they just kind of shut off negotiations and say, well, this is just not going to work, and keep them as a one-year rental and let them walk? I wouldn't think they'd want to do that, but we'll have to wait and see. But things are not good between Nylander and the Leafs right now, and you have to think if he does not change his mind and come down off his demands that a trade is getting more and more likely. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.